The president did, of course, have a lot of conflicting pressures on him in his relationship with the Marcoses and his wife's relationship with the Marcoses, his, I think, genuine philosophical attachment to the need for the United States to sort of stand by its friends. And I personally find that, fairly powerful argument. I saw the President Reagan, frequently when I was back in Washington on consultations, and I would go in and brief him. There were always a lot of other people present, but they were basically just there to listen. Members of the White House staff and the National Security Council staff and various people from state or defense. And he was always, I was always struck by the fact that he seemed to be pretty up to date on what was going on out there. He was obviously very concerned with what was happening there, and I think, it was apparent that he felt this conflict. On the other hand, the situation was deteriorating so badly that it was very difficult for anyone to say, stop, we can't back off from Marcos. The future may bring worse things. He's better than what might come after him. I mean, first of all, he seemed to be mortally ill, so that what might come after him might be coming after him in any event, no matter what we did. And secondly, the insurgency was growing, the military was disintegrating, the public protests were growing, the economy was in chaos. I mean, there was never really a point at which anyone could stand up and say, stop. I mean, he's the best we're going to get, let's stick with him. And I think we were fortunate that that point never came. I'd been a professional Foreign Service officer for almost 25 years at that point. I tended to be cautious. I didn't think it was time for rash behavior out there. I thought it was a time for professionalism. I didn't think that it was a time for the embassy to be kind of spouting off one way or the other. Rather, we should simply keep quiet and do our jobs as best we could. And I think that, I hope rightly, people in Washington had confidence in my judgment. They didn't think I was going to do anything wild. So I think that I probably had a little bit more flexibility than would have been normal under those circumstances. But also, I think it's important to remember that the thing was moving so fast that, they never had time to send me instructions. They barely had time to make decisions themselves as to what they wanted to see happen, wanted us to do. So that I really had to, be comfortable with what we were about, what our objectives were, and have enough inner serenity to go out there and do it, even though I didn't in all cases have a signed piece of paper saying this is the policy and this is what we want you to do. I think that there was something of a battle going on, and I know there was, within the White House, with some of the White House staff, and I gather that Don Regan was part of this, trying, I would hope, to simply ensure that the process didn't move too quickly, that we didn't make a mistake by trying to get too far out ahead. But the statement that the president made right after the election about there having been fraud on both sides, quite frankly, produced what was probably the single worst day of my life, because I had to then try to deal with the consequences of that in Manila, where it came like a giant tub of cold water, because what the opposition thought they were hearing was confirmation of their worst suspicions, that in the end, despite all of our rhetoric about support for democratic processes and free elections, that in the end, we would go home with the guy that we came with, and that was Ferdinand Marcos. That's what they thought they were beginning to hear. More early that morning, I had been out at the house getting ready to come into the office, and because of the time difference, bad news usually arrived there early in the morning, because that was the evening or late afternoon in the United States. And the president was just coming on the radio when I left with this news conference. And by the time I got to the embassy 20 minutes later, he had made this remark about there having been fraud on both sides. And of course, our staff in the embassy was absolutely on the floor and devastated by this, because they recognized that it was a tremendous political liability, and our whole staff is devastated. I mean, they've been working 20 hours a day, literally, for weeks, dedicated to this proposition that the United States was going to stand on the principle of fair elections. And we had watched the elections unfold, and it was quite clear to us that there really wasn't fraud on both sides. There was massive fraud on the government side. Well, I screamed immediately at the first person I could reach on the phone when I got back there. But of course, I was like the minister preaching to the choir. I mean, everyone I was talking to was just as horrified by the president's statement as I was. And finally, I got a message back indirectly. I think it was from Secretary Shultz saying, "All right, you've made your point. Relax. We'll try to get it fixed." But it was one of those times when you just feel so kind of personally embarrassed. So that, was unobvious. I mean, that was one of those rare events which could really turn a policy around or turn a situation around. Because I was concerned that if the opposition concluded that, in effect, this was a sign that the United States was going to stick with Marcos, that it would become, one, demoralized very quickly, and two, that it would develop a very nasty anti-U.S. edge. So by this time it was early evening in Washington, and I didn't really have time or opportunity to do much consulting other than a couple of phone conversations. But I simply called Cory Aquino's office and said I wanted to come over and talk to her. So I went over to Mrs. Aquino's office, which was in the Cowanco building, a big skyscraper, relatively speaking, in Makati. And it was like walking into a freezer. I mean, the entire suite of offices where she was working was just chilled, and these were all people that I'd seen quite a bit of. I went into her office, and she was there with her, I think it was with her brother, Peping, and Ramon Mitra, Munching Mitra, who was an old friend and acquaintance. And I had never had the full benefit of one of Cory Aquino's icier moments before, but she was no doubt very upset, angry. And I simply said, look, this isn't the real U.S. position, which you've heard. All I can do is tell you to be patient. It takes us a while sometimes to come to the proper conclusion. But in this instance, I'm fundamentally convinced we will come to the proper conclusion, and you will see that, and I hope you will see it fairly soon. So just please, I ask, exercise a little patience. So she said, okay, I'll do that. Maybe I'll even see Habib, who was coming as the president's emissary. Maybe I'll even see Habib when he comes. And that was it.